Maria Elena Rodriguez wiped the dust from the old piano keys in the community center, her calloused fingers moving gently across the yellowed ivory. At 52, she had spent most of her life cleaning buildings, washing dishes, and doing whatever work she could find to support her 3 children. But every evening when the world grew quiet, she would sneak into this abandoned room and let her fingers dance across the keys. She had never owned a piano. Her family could barely afford rent, let alone luxuries like musical instruments. Yet somehow music lived in her soul. As a child, she would press her ear against the wall of her neighbor's apartment, listening to classical pieces that drifted through the thin walls. She memorized every note, every pause, every crescendo. In her mind, she played along with the masters, her imaginary fingers keeping perfect time with Chopin, Mozart, and Beethoven. Years passed, and life became harder. Maria's husband left when their youngest was only 5, leaving her alone to raise 3 children on a cleaning lady's salary. There were nights when she worked 3 jobs, coming home only to collapse into bed for a few hours before starting again. But music remained her escape, her secret passion that no one knew about. The community center where she worked nights had this old, forgotten piano tucked away in a storage room. The manager had told her it was broken, destined for the dump. But Maria discovered it still had a voice, though some keys stuck and others were slightly out of tune. She began staying after her shift, teaching herself properly. Her rough hands, cracked from years of scrubbing floors with harsh chemicals, learned to coax beautiful melodies from the neglected instrument. She practiced scales until her fingers bled. She played simple songs at first, then gradually attempted more complex pieces. YouTube videos on her cracked phone screen became her teachers. She would watch the same tutorial dozens of times, pausing and rewinding until she understood each movement. Her children thought she was working extra hours for more money. They never knew their mother was becoming a pianist in secret. Maria's eldest daughter, Rosa, was studying music at the local college on a partial scholarship. Rosa often complained about her theory classes and piano lessons, calling them boring and difficult. Maria would nod sympathetically, hiding the irony that she would give anything to have such opportunities. She encouraged Rosa to appreciate what she had, though she never revealed why she cared so deeply about music education. One evening, Rosa came home crying. She had auditioned for the college's advanced performance program, but was rejected. The professor, a renowned pianist named Dr. Victor Hoffman, had been particularly harsh in his critique. He told Rosa she lacked the passion and natural talent needed for serious musical study. Rosa decided to quit her music program and change majors. Maria's heart broke watching her daughter give up on music so easily. That night after Rosa went to bed, Maria sat at the old piano in the community center and played with more emotion than ever before. She thought about dreams deferred, opportunities missed, and the cruel way life sometimes crushed the spirits of those who dared to hope. Her fingers found Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she had been practicing for months. As she played, tears rolled down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the pure joy of creating something beautiful, despite all the hardships. The next morning, Rosa showed Maria a flyer she had found at college. The city was hosting its annual open stage competition at the Grand Theater downtown. Anyone could audition, regardless of background or training. The winner would receive a cash prize and the chance to perform with the city orchestra. Rosa laughed bitterly, calling it a joke. She said only trained musicians with expensive instruments and formal education had any real chance. Maria studied the flyer quietly. The audition was in 3 weeks. For the first time in her life, she considered stepping out of the shadows. What if she auditioned? The thought seemed ridiculous. She was just a cleaning lady with no formal training, no proper piano at home, and hands that smelled of bleach more often than they touched piano keys. But something deep inside her stirred, a voice that whispered she had something to offer the world. That evening, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She would audition for the open stage competition. She didn't tell her children or her few friends. This was her secret mission, her chance to prove that music belonged to everyone, not just those born into privilege. She had 3 weeks to prepare the performance of her lifetime. She chose 3 pieces to showcase her range: Bach's Invention No. 1 in C major for technical precision, Debussy's Clair de Lune for emotional depth, and Chopin's revolutionary etude for power and passion. These were ambitious choices for someone with her background, but Maria had been playing them in secret for years. Now she would play them for the world. The old piano at the community center became her stage. She practiced every night after work, sometimes until dawn. Her fingers, already tough from years of manual labor, adapted to the increased demands. She played through pain, through exhaustion, through doubt. Each night she imagined herself on the grand stage, sharing her music with hundreds of people who would finally hear what had been locked in her heart for so many years. 3 weeks had never felt so short, yet every day brought her closer to either triumph or humiliation. Maria didn't care about winning the competition. She just wanted the chance to prove that music was for everyone, that passion could overcome poverty, and that dreams didn't have expiration dates. She was about to step into a world that had never welcomed people like her, but she was ready to play her heart out regardless of the consequences. The morning of the audition arrived gray and cold. Maria stood before her small bathroom mirror, trying to tame her graying hair into something presentable. She had borrowed Rosa's only good dress, a simple black one that was slightly too big but would have to do. Her hand shook as she applied the lipstick she rarely wore. This was it. After weeks of secret preparation, she was about to step into a world she had only dreamed of entering. The Grand Theater downtown was a magnificent building, with marble columns and golden details that spoke of old money and high culture. Maria had walked past it countless times on her way to various cleaning jobs, always wondering what it looked like inside. Today she would find out. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had probably cleaned buildings owned by the same wealthy families who regularly attended performances here. As she approached the theater, Maria noticed other auditioners arriving. They came in expensive cars, carrying professional instrument cases, wearing clothes that cost more than she earned in a month. Young people with perfect posture walked confidently beside their parents, discussing their conservatory training and previous performances. Maria suddenly felt very small and very out of place. Inside the theater lobby, the atmosphere buzzed with nervous energy and quiet competitiveness. Pianists sat in corners, silently practicing fingering on their knees. Others warmed up on portable keyboards they had brought. Everyone seemed to know everyone else from music schools, competitions, or private lessons with famous teachers. Maria recognized no one, and no one looked twice at the middle-aged cleaning lady sitting quietly in the back row. She overheard conversations about Juilliard applications, international competitions, and summer programs in Europe. These people spoke a language of musical privilege that Maria had learned only through observation and stolen moments. Yet as she listened, she realized something important. They talked about music as a career, a path to success and recognition. For Maria, music was something deeper, something that had kept her soul alive through the darkest times. That difference might matter today. The audition process was intimidating. Contestants drew numbers to determine their performance order. Maria drew number 47 out of 63 auditioners. This meant she would perform in the afternoon, giving her hours to sit and watch others, to second-guess herself, and to consider running away before anyone could hear her play and judge her presumption. As the morning progressed, she watched performer after performer take the stage. Most were young, technically proficient, and obviously well-trained. They played with precision and proper form, executing difficult pieces with mechanical perfection. But something was missing from many performances. The music was correct but somehow cold, as if they were demonstrating their skills rather than sharing their souls. Dr. Victor Hoffman sat in the front row with 2 other judges, taking notes on each performance. Maria recognized him from Rosa's descriptions, though seeing him in person was even more intimidating. He was tall and severe, with silver hair and expensive clothes. His reputation for harsh criticism was legendary in the local music community. He had studied at European conservatories, performed with major orchestras, and taught only the most promising students. To him, Maria represented everything wrong with open competitions that let amateurs waste everyone's time. During the lunch break, Maria found a quiet corner of the theater and closed her eyes. She thought about why she was here. This wasn't about winning or proving herself to people like Dr. Hoffman. This was about honoring the music that had sustained her through decades of struggle. This was about showing Rosa that dreams didn't die just because someone in authority said you weren't good enough. This was about claiming her right to make beautiful sounds in a world that had tried to silence her voice. When number 47 was finally called, Maria walked to the stage on unsteady legs. The piano was a magnificent grand instrument, far superior to anything she had ever touched. She sat on the bench and adjusted the height, aware that every movement was being scrutinized. The theater lights were bright and hot. The three judges looked up at her with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed impatience. Dr. Hoffman glanced at his program, then at Maria with obvious confusion. He had expected number 47 to be someone he recognized, perhaps a student from one of the local music schools. Instead, he saw a woman in a borrowed dress with working hands and nervous energy. He leaned over to whisper something to his fellow judges, and Maria caught the edge of his smirk. She announced her first piece, Bach's Invention Number 1 in C major. This was a test piece, something to demonstrate technical control and understanding of Baroque style. As her fingers found the keys, Maria felt the familiar magic happen. The nervousness melted away, replaced by the pure joy of making music. She played the Bach with crystalline clarity, each voice distinct and purposeful. The counterpoint danced between her hands like a conversation between old friends. But Dr. Hoffman was already writing notes, his pen moving dismissively across the paper. He had heard this piece performed by countless students over the years. Technical competence wasn't enough to impress him, especially from someone who clearly had no business being on this stage. He was mentally composing the critique he would deliver, something about amateur enthusiasm being no substitute for proper training and natural talent. Maria finished the Bach and paused briefly before announcing her second piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune. This would test her ability to create atmosphere and emotional depth. As she began the opening measures, something shifted in the theater. The impressionistic harmonies seemed to glow under her touch, painting pictures of moonlight and dreams. Her years of struggle had taught her about longing and beauty found in unexpected places, and she poured all of that experience into Debussy's masterpiece. Even Dr. Hoffman looked up from his notes, momentarily caught off guard by the unexpected depth of feeling, but he quickly returned to his writing, reminding himself that emotional display was no substitute for proper technique and theoretical understanding. Amateur performers often tried to compensate for their limitations with excessive sentimentality. He would not be fooled by such tactics. For her final piece, Maria had chosen Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, one of the most technically demanding works in the piano repertoire. This was her biggest risk. If she failed to execute it properly, it would confirm everyone's assumption that she didn't belong here. But if she succeeded, it would prove that passion and dedication could produce results that rivaled formal training. As she launched into the thunderous opening chords, Maria felt every emotion from her difficult life channeling through her fingers. This wasn't just a piano exercise, it was her revolution, her declaration that music belonged to everyone who loved it deeply enough to sacrifice for it. The rapid passages flowed like water, powered by years of secret practice and genuine musical understanding. The dramatic climaxes erupted with a power that surprised even her. The theater fell completely silent. Even Dr. Hoffman had stopped writing and was staring at the stage with an expression of shock and growing recognition. This cleaning lady was playing Chopin better than most of his advanced students. Her technique was unconventional but effective, her musical understanding profound and personal. He realized he was witnessing something rare and authentic, something that couldn't be taught in any conservatory. As the last notes of the Revolutionary Etude faded into silence, the theater remained completely still. Maria sat at the piano bench, her chest rising and falling rapidly, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool temperature. She had poured everything into that performance, holding nothing back. For a moment, she forgot where she was, lost in the afterglow of having expressed her deepest self through music. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Maria finally looked toward the judges' table, where Dr. Hoffman sat with his pen frozen above his notepad. His two colleagues exchanged glances, clearly moved by what they had just heard. But Hoffman's face was a mask of controlled displeasure. The performance had caught him completely off guard, and he didn't like being surprised, especially by someone who challenged his assumptions about who deserved to make music. Finally, Dr. Hoffman cleared his throat and spoke in his crisp, authoritative voice that carried easily through the theater. "Miss Rodriguez, is it?" He consulted his program with exaggerated care. That was certainly an energetic performance. However, I must point out several technical deficiencies that indicate a lack of proper formal training. Maria's heart sank, but she remained seated at the piano, waiting for him to continue. She had expected this moment, had prepared herself for rejection, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a physical blow. Hoffman stood up, his tall frame commanding attention as he began what sounded like a prepared lecture. The fingering in the Bach was unorthodox and inefficient. Your pedaling technique in the Debussy showed a fundamental misunderstanding of impressionistic style. And while your Chopin had a certain raw energy, it lacked the refined interpretation that comes only from years of study with qualified instructors. He paused, looking directly at Maria with what might have been pity or disdain. Music at this level requires more than enthusiasm, Miss Rodriguez. It demands technical precision, theoretical knowledge, and an understanding of performance tradition that cannot be gained from amateur practice. I'm sure you enjoy playing as a hobby, but this competition is meant for serious musicians with professional aspirations. The theater buzzed with uncomfortable murmurs. Some audience members shifted in their seats, sensing the cruelty in Hoffman's words. His fellow judges looked distinctly uncomfortable, but neither spoke up to contradict him. In the classical music world, Hoffman's reputation and authority were rarely questioned. Maria felt heat rising in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. Something deeper was stirring, a lifetime of being dismissed and underestimated finally reaching its breaking point. She stood slowly from the piano bench, her borrowed dress suddenly feeling less important, her calloused hands no longer a source of shame. "Dr. Hoffman," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the theater's acoustics. "You speak of theoretical knowledge and performance tradition, but may I ask what you heard in my music today, beyond the technical details?" Hoffman looked surprised by her question, then slightly annoyed. "I beg your pardon? When I played the Bach, did you hear conversation? When I played the Debussy, did you see moonlight? When I played the Chopin, did you feel the revolution?" Maria's voice grew stronger with each question. "Or did you only hear fingering and pedaling techniques?" The theater fell completely silent again. No one had ever seen an auditioner challenge Dr. Hoffman so directly. His face reddened slightly and his voice became icier. "Miss Rodriguez's technique is music. Without proper foundation, emotional display becomes mere sentimentality. You cannot simply feel your way through great compositions that require years of disciplined study to understand properly." Maria nodded slowly, as if considering his words. Then she walked back to the piano bench and sat down again. "Perhaps you're right about technique, Dr. Hoffman, but I wonder if you might help me understand something." She placed her hands on the keys. "Could you show me the correct way to play this passage from the Chopin?" Hoffman hesitated. He hadn't expected this turn in their confrontation. The other judges leaned forward with interest. Everyone in the theater sensed that something unprecedented was happening. "I don't see how that would be appropriate in this setting," Hoffman replied stiffly. "Please," Maria pressed gently. "I'm genuinely curious to learn from someone with your expertise. Surely a few measures to demonstrate proper technique wouldn't take too much time." The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. Hoffman found himself trapped by his own authority. To refuse would suggest either arrogance or perhaps uncertainty about his own abilities. To accept would put him in the unusual position of performing for an audience that had just heard this cleaning lady play the same piece, with remarkable power. Reluctantly, Hoffman walked to the stage. Maria graciously moved aside, gesturing for him to take the bench. The maestro sat with perfect posture, adjusted his cuffs, and began playing the opening of the revolutionary etude. His technique was indeed flawless, every note precisely placed, every dynamic carefully controlled. It was a textbook performance that demonstrated complete mastery of the technical requirements. But something was missing. Where Maria had played with fire and passion, Hoffman played with cool perfection. His version was correct in every measurable way, yet it somehow felt empty, like a beautiful but uninhabited house. The notes were all there, but the soul was absent. When he finished the passage, scattered applause rippled through the theater, polite but not enthusiastic. Hoffman returned to his seat, clearly expecting Maria to acknowledge his superior technical skill. Instead, she surprised him again. "Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. Your technique is indeed impeccable." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I noticed something interesting. When you played those measures, I heard every note perfectly executed. When I played them, I felt a revolution. Both approaches have value. But I wonder which one Chopin himself would have preferred. The theater erupted in surprised murmurs. No one could believe this unknown woman was engaging in a philosophical debate about musical interpretation with one of the city's most respected authorities. Hoffman's face grew darker with each passing moment. "Miss Rodriguez," he said through gritted teeth, "Chopin would have preferred proper training and respect for the musical tradition he helped create. Your presumption in questioning established pedagogical methods shows exactly the kind of amateur arrogance that competitions like this unfortunately encourage." Maria stood again, this time with complete composure. The fear and nervousness from earlier had burned away, replaced by a clarity of purpose she had never felt before. "Dr. Hoffman, with respect, I believe Chopin would have preferred whoever played his music with genuine understanding and authentic emotion, regardless of their background or training." She gestured toward the audience, many of whom were nodding in agreement. Music doesn't belong only to those who can afford conservatory education. It belongs to anyone who loves it deeply enough to sacrifice for it, to practice until their fingers bleed, to find beauty in broken-down pianos in forgotten rooms. Her voice rose with passion. "I may not have your credentials or your technique, but I have lived the struggle that Chopin wrote about. I have felt the revolution he captured in those notes. And today I shared that authentic experience with everyone in this theater." The confrontation had reached its climax. Dr. Hoffman stood frozen, his authority challenged in the most public possible way. The other judges watched with fascination. The audience held its breath, and Maria stood center stage. No longer a humble cleaning lady, but a woman who had found her voice and refused to be silenced. The tension in the theater was so thick it seemed to press against everyone's skin. Dr. Hoffman stood rigid beside the judge's table, his face a careful mask that couldn't quite hide his fury at being challenged so publicly. Maria remained center stage, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, and she felt strangely liberated by it. The other two judges, Dr. Sarah Chen and Professor Michael Torres, exchanged meaningful glances. Both had been uncomfortable with Hoffman's harsh dismissal of Maria's extraordinary performance, but neither had dared to contradict him directly. Now, watching this cleaning lady stand up to the most intimidating figure in their musical community, they found their own courage stirring. Dr. Chen cleared her throat and spoke for the first time since the auditions began. "If I may interject, Dr. Hoffman, I believe we should discuss Miss Rodriguez's performance more thoroughly before moving to the next contestant." Her voice was diplomatic but firm, and everyone in the theater could sense the undercurrent of disagreement with her colleague. Hoffman turned toward her with barely concealed irritation. "I believe I've made my assessment quite clear. Sarah, technical deficiencies cannot be overlooked simply because of emotional display." "But Victor," Professor Torres joined in, using Hoffman's first name in a way that suggested they were equals despite Hoffman's domineering presence, "surely we must consider the overall impact of a performance, not just the technical elements." Miss Rodriguez's interpretation showed remarkable musical understanding. The audience began to murmur more loudly. Many had been moved by Maria's performance and were uncomfortable with Hoffman's dismissive attitude. In the back rows, some of the other contestants who had performed earlier whispered among themselves. Several admitted quietly that they had been technically superior, but emotionally inferior to what they had just witnessed. An elderly woman in the third row stood up suddenly. She was impeccably dressed and carried herself with the dignity of old money and cultural authority. "Excuse me," she said in a voice accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "I am Margaret Worthington, and I have been a patron of this theater for 30 years. I have heard thousands of performances in this hall, including concerts by world-famous artists." The theater fell silent again. Everyone knew Mrs. Worthington's name. Her family had donated millions to local cultural institutions, and her opinion carried tremendous weight in the city's arts community. Even Dr. Hoffman looked uncertain about how to respond to her interruption. "What I heard from Miss Rodriguez today," Mrs. Worthington continued, "was not just technically proficient playing, though it was certainly that. What I heard was music that spoke directly to the soul, music that reminded me why I fell in love with piano performances in the first place." She looked directly at Hoffman. "With all due respect to your expertise, Dr. Hoffman, I believe you are allowing your prejudices to cloud your judgment." The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. No one had ever publicly suggested that the renowned Dr. Hoffman might be biased or unfair. His reputation was built on the assumption that his standards were purely artistic and completely objective. Hoffman's control finally cracked slightly. "Mrs. Worthington, I appreciate your support for the arts, but musical evaluation requires trained ears and professional expertise. Emotional reactions from audience members, however well-intentioned, cannot substitute for rigorous artistic standards." But Mrs. Worthington was not easily dismissed. "Dr. Hoffman, I may not have your formal training, but I have been listening to classical music for 70 years. I know the difference between technical correctness and artistic truth. What Miss Rodriguez gave us today was artistic truth of the highest order." Other audience members began to speak up. A young man in his 20s stood and said, "I'm a music student at the university, and I've never heard anyone play Chopin with that kind of authentic emotion." An older gentleman added, "I came here expecting to be bored by amateur performances, but Miss Rodriguez's playing moved me to tears." The spontaneous outpouring of support surprised everyone, especially Maria. She had expected to face this challenge alone, but suddenly found herself surrounded by allies she didn't know she had. The power dynamic in the theater was shifting dramatically. Dr. Chen seized the moment. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to discuss Miss Rodriguez's performance privately among the judges." Her suggestion was clearly an attempt to diffuse the public confrontation and find a face-saving solution for everyone involved. But Maria stepped forward before anyone could respond. "If I may, I would like to say something to everyone here today." She looked out at the audience, then at the other contestants, and finally at the three judges. "I didn't come here expecting to win anything. I came here to prove that music belongs to all of us, not just those who can afford expensive training." Her voice carried the weight of decades of struggle and determination. "I learned to play piano on a broken instrument in a storage room, practicing after cleaning office buildings until dawn. I never had a private teacher or attended a music school. But I had something that can't be taught in any classroom. I had music living in my heart, demanding to be shared with the world." She gestured toward the other contestants. "Everyone who performed today has talent and dedication. The young people here have advantages I never had, and they've worked hard to develop their skills. But music isn't a competition where only the formally trained deserve to participate. Music is a language that speaks to the human spirit, and anyone who truly understands that language has something valuable to offer." Maria turned to Dr. Hoffman, her voice becoming gentler but no less determined. "Dr. Hoffman, I respect your knowledge and expertise. You've dedicated your life to understanding music at the highest levels, but I ask you to consider whether your standards might sometimes exclude voices that need to be heard." She paused, looking around the theater one more time. "Whether I advance in this competition or not doesn't matter to me now. What matters is that today, in this beautiful theater, a cleaning lady played Chopin and people listened with their hearts. That's a victory that no judge can take away." The theater erupted in spontaneous applause, starting with Mrs. Worthington and spreading quickly through the entire audience. Even some of the other contestants joined in, recognizing that Maria had articulated something important about music and democracy, about art and accessibility. Dr. Hoffman stood in the middle of this ovation, his authority diminished but not completely destroyed. He was a proud man facing a moment of truth about his own beliefs and biases. The easy dismissal he had planned was no longer possible. Whatever happened next would require him to make a choice about what kind of musician and teacher he wanted to be. The applause continued for several minutes, washing over Maria like a warm embrace. She had found her voice in more ways than one, and the world would never look quite the same again. The applause gradually faded, leaving the theater in a state of charged expectancy. Everyone waited to see how Dr. Hoffman would respond to this unprecedented challenge to his authority. The other judges, Dr. Chen and Professor Torres, watched him carefully, ready to support whatever decision would preserve the integrity of the competition, while acknowledging the extraordinary situation they faced. Hoffman stood motionless for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the floor. Decades of teaching and performing had built his reputation on the foundation of rigorous standards and uncompromising excellence. He had always believed that musical achievement required formal training, disciplined study, and innate talent developed through proper channels. Everything about Maria Rodriguez challenged those fundamental assumptions. Yet he could not deny what his ears had told him. Her performance of the revolutionary etude had been genuinely extraordinary, not just technically proficient, but emotionally authentic in ways that many of his most accomplished students never achieved. The passion and understanding she had brought to Chopin's music came from lived experience that no conservatory could teach. Mrs. Worthington remained standing in the third row, her presence a reminder that the broader musical community was watching this moment unfold. Her support for Maria carried significant weight, but more importantly, her words had forced Hoffman to confront his own possible prejudices. Was he truly evaluating music objectively, or was he allowing social assumptions to color his judgment? The other contestants watched with fascination and growing respect for Maria. Many had initially dismissed her as an amateur who didn't belong in their company. But her performance and her courage in standing up to Dr. Hoffman had earned their admiration. Several privately admitted they had never played with such emotional depth or authentic connection to the music. Dr. Chen finally broke the silence. Perhaps we should hear from all three judges before making any final decisions. She looked meaningfully at her colleagues, clearly hoping to prevent further public confrontation while ensuring that Maria's performance received fair consideration. Professor Torres nodded eagerly. I would very much like to share my thoughts on Miss Rodriguez's audition. He turned toward Maria with obvious respect. Miss Rodriguez, your performance today demonstrated something that we rarely encounter in formal competitions: complete musical authenticity. Your technical approach may be unconventional, but your understanding of these composers' intentions was profound and deeply personal. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've taught piano for 25 years, and I've heard these pieces performed countless times by students with impeccable training. But your interpretation of the Chopin etude reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. You didn't just play the notes. You lived them. Dr. Chen added her voice to Torres's assessment. I agree completely. Miss Rodriguez, your performance showed us that musical excellence can emerge from dedication and passion, regardless of formal training. The emotion you brought to Debussy's Clair de Lune was particularly moving. You understood the impressionistic style intuitively, in ways that many classically trained pianists struggled to achieve. Both judges looked toward Dr. Hoffman, waiting for his response. The theater held its collective breath as the most senior and respected judge prepared to speak. His next words would determine not only Maria's fate in the competition, but also the kind of musical community they wanted to foster. Hoffman raised his head slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. When he spoke, his voice carried less of its earlier coldness. Miss Rodriguez, he began, you have presented me with a significant challenge today, and not just in the way you might expect. He walked closer to the stage, his posture less rigid than before. For 30 years I have maintained that musical excellence requires rigorous training and adherence to established traditions. I have believed that protecting musical standards meant excluding those without proper credentials. Today you have forced me to question whether those beliefs have sometimes blinded me to authentic musical expression. The theater was absolutely silent. Even Maria held her breath as Hoffman continued. Your performance of the revolutionary etude was technically imperfect by conservatory standards. Your pedaling was inconsistent, your fingering choices were unconventional, and your interpretive choices would not pass muster in a formal examination. Maria felt her heart sinking, but Hoffman raised his hand slightly and continued. However, your performance was also emotionally honest, musically compelling, and artistically valid in ways that transcend technical evaluation. You brought something to Chopin's music that cannot be taught in any classroom: the authentic experience of struggle, perseverance, and triumph over adversity. He paused, looking directly at Maria with what might have been the beginning of respect. You have reminded me that music is ultimately about communication between human souls, not just demonstration of technical prowess. While I cannot ignore the importance of proper training and musical education, I must acknowledge that you have achieved something remarkable through dedication and authentic passion. The audience began to murmur with excitement, sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. Mrs. Worthington nodded approvingly, while the other contestants leaned forward to hear Hoffman's final verdict. "Miss Rodriguez," Hoffman said, his voice growing stronger and more decisive, "I owe you an apology for my initial dismissive attitude. Your challenge to my assumptions was not presumptuous. It was necessary. You have shown me that musical authenticity can emerge from unexpected places, and that our community is stronger when we welcome diverse voices and experiences." He turned to address the entire theater. "Today we have all witnessed something special, a performer who reminded us why music matters, why it has the power to move hearts and change minds. Miss Rodriguez may not have formal credentials, but she has something more valuable: the ability to transform written notes into lived experience." Hoffman looked back at Maria, his expression completely transformed from its earlier hostility. "With the full agreement of my fellow judges, I am pleased to advance you to the final round of this competition. Your performance today earned that honor through its artistic merit, and your courage in defending your right to make music has earned our respect." The theater exploded in applause more thunderous than before. People jumped to their feet, cheering not just for Maria's advancement but for the broader victory she represented. The other contestants applauded enthusiastically, recognizing that her success enlarged rather than diminished their own opportunities. Maria stood on the stage, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. She had not only advanced in the competition, but had also challenged and changed the most intimidating authority figure in her musical world. More importantly, she had proven to herself and everyone present that dreams didn't have expiration dates and that music truly belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. Dr. Hoffman approached the stage and extended his hand to Maria. "Miss Rodriguez, I would be honored if you would consider allowing me to work with you in preparing for the finals, not to change your musical authenticity, but to help you refine the technical elements that could make your performances even more powerful." The offer was unprecedented and generous, representing a complete reversal of his earlier position. Maria shook his hand gratefully, understanding that this moment marked not just her own transformation but his as well. The maestro who had once dismissed her was now offering to be her mentor, recognizing that he had as much to learn from her authenticity as she had to gain from his expertise. As the applause continued, Maria looked out at the audience with new eyes. These weren't just strangers watching a competition. They were witnesses to something larger than music. They had seen what happened when talent met opportunity, when courage challenged convention, and when the human spirit refused to be silenced by artificial barriers. Rosa would be so proud when she heard about this moment. Her daughter had given up on music too easily, but perhaps Maria's example would inspire her to try again. More than that, perhaps Rosa would understand that her mother's years of encouragement came from a place of deep musical knowledge and experience, not just maternal support. The final round was still ahead, and Maria knew she would face even greater challenges and more accomplished competitors. But something fundamental had changed today. She was no longer the cleaning lady who snuck into empty rooms to play forgotten pianos. She was Maria Elena Rodriguez, musician, artist, and living proof that music could transform anyone brave enough to embrace it completely. As she finally left the stage, surrounded by congratulations and new friends, Maria felt a deep sense of completion. Win or lose in the finals, she had already achieved her most important goal. She had claimed her rightful place in the world of music and opened the door for others like her to follow. 3 weeks later, Maria stood backstage at the Grand Theater waiting for her name to be announced for the final competition. The intervening weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation, practice, and unexpected attention. News of her confrontation with Dr. Hoffman had spread throughout the city's musical community, and her story had even been featured in the local newspaper. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the cleaning lady who had challenged the maestro and won. Dr. Hoffman had been true to his word, working with Maria almost daily to refine her technical approach while preserving the emotional authenticity that made her playing special. Their sessions had been revelatory for both of them. He learned about the profound musical insights that could emerge from lived experience, while she gained the technical tools to express her ideas even more powerfully. Their relationship had evolved from antagonistic to respectful to genuinely collaborative. Hoffman discovered that Maria's unconventional fingering choices often served her musical intentions better than textbook approaches. Meanwhile, Maria learned that proper technique could enhance rather than diminish her emotional expression. Together, they had crafted interpretations that combined her authentic passion with his refined understanding of musical structure. The finals featured only 5 contestants, each representing a different approach to musical excellence. There was Jennifer Chen, a prodigy who had been playing professionally since age 12. Marcus Thompson, a Juilliard graduate with impeccable credentials and several competition victories. Isabella Santos, a local favorite who combined technical brilliance with stage charisma. David Park, a young composer-performer whose original works had gained national attention. And then there was Maria, the 52-year-old cleaning lady, whose presence in the finals had attracted unprecedented attention to the competition. The theater was completely sold out for the first time in its history, with people eager to witness what had already become a legendary story. Rosa sat in the front row, beaming with pride and newfound respect for her mother. She had returned to her music studies with renewed enthusiasm, inspired by Maria's example and Dr. Hoffman's offer to teach her as well. The professor had realized that his harsh critique of Rosa had been unfair, and he was now working to repair that relationship while helping her rediscover her musical passion. Mrs. Worthington had claimed an entire section for what she called Team Maria, friends, co-workers and supporters who had never attended a classical music concert before, but were drawn by Maria's inspiring story. The theater buzzed with an unusual energy, part concert hall reverence and part sports arena excitement. When Maria's name was announced, the applause was already thunderous before she appeared on stage. She wore a simple but elegant dress that Rosa had helped her choose, and she walked to the piano with the confidence of someone who had already proven herself. The nervous cleaning lady from the auditions had been replaced by a woman who knew she belonged on this stage. For the finals, Maria had chosen a program that told the story of her musical journey. She began with Bach's Goldberg Variations aria, representing the classical foundation that had sustained her through decades of secret practice. The opening notes floated through the theater with crystalline purity, immediately establishing the depth of her musical understanding. She followed with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that required both technical mastery and emotional maturity. This was her tribute to all the years of struggle and perseverance, the nights when she had played through exhaustion and doubt. Her interpretation wove together triumph and tragedy, hope and despair, in ways that made the familiar piece sound newly minted. For her final selection, Maria had chosen Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata Third Movement. This was perhaps the most demanding piece in her repertoire, requiring blazing technical skill and unwavering concentration. As she launched into the thunderous opening, it became clear that her weeks of work with Dr. Hoffman had elevated her playing to new heights. The technical improvements were obvious to trained ears, but they served a larger musical purpose. Every rapid passage, every dynamic contrast, every harmonic progression was shaped by her deep understanding of what the music meant. This wasn't just a display of finger gymnastics. It was a conversation with Beethoven himself about the nature of struggle and redemption. As Maria built toward the sonata's climactic final pages, something magical happened in the theater. The usual boundary between performer and audience dissolved completely. Everyone in the hall was experiencing the music together, sharing in Maria's journey from the shadows to the spotlight, from doubt to certainty, from silence to triumphant voice. When the final chord rang out, the theater fell into the kind of profound silence that follows truly transcendent performances. For a moment, no one moved or breathed, as if unwilling to break the spell that Maria had woven. Then Mrs. Worthington stood up and began to applaud. Within seconds, the entire theater erupted in the most sustained and enthusiastic ovation in its history. People jumped to their feet, cheering and crying and celebrating something that went far beyond musical competition. They were celebrating the victory of human spirit over circumstance, of passion over privilege, of authenticity over artifice. Dr. Hoffman was among the first to stand, applauding with genuine emotion and pride. His transformation over the past month had been as remarkable as Maria's preparation. He had rediscovered why he had fallen in love with music in the first place, and he had learned that his role as a teacher was not to gatekeep, but to nurture whatever authentic musical impulses he encountered. The other contestants joined the standing ovation without hesitation. They recognized that Maria's success enlarged rather than diminished their own achievements. She had raised the bar for what it meant to be a complete musician, someone who could combine technical skill with emotional truth and personal authenticity. The ovation continued for nearly 10 minutes, with waves of applause breaking over Maria like ocean tides. She stood at the piano, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had happened. Win or lose, she had already achieved everything she had dreamed of when she first sat down at that broken piano in the community center. When the judges announced the results later that evening, Maria placed second overall, losing by the narrowest of margins to Jennifer Chen, whose flawless technique and mature interpretations had impressed even Dr. Hoffman. But the audience's reaction made it clear who had won their hearts. Maria's performance would be remembered and discussed for years to come, while her story would inspire countless others to pursue their own musical dreams, regardless of their circumstances. As Maria walked off the stage for the final time, surrounded by congratulations and interview requests, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. Every sacrifice, every hour of secret practice, every doubt overcome had led to this triumph. She had not only found her voice, she had used it to change the world around her, proving that music truly belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. The cleaning lady had become a maestro in her own right, and the world of music was better for it. Her standing ovation would echo in that theater for generations, a reminder that greatness could emerge from anywhere when passion met opportunity and courage conquered fear.